Hello and welcome to In Conversation with WLV Doctoral College. I'm Dr. Deborah Curitan and I work in the Doctoral College at the University of Wolverhampton. As you can see, I am not sitting here with Ben today. I'm actually sitting here with Dr. Opinderjit Takhar. Opinderjit, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role at the university?
Thanks, Deborah. So, as you've already mentioned, I'm Dr. Opinderjit Kaur Takhar. I'm Associate Professor of Sikh Studies at the university, and I also am Director of the Centre for Sikh and Punjabi Studies, which was actually launched in the university a couple of years ago. It's the only academic centre of its kind, not just here in the UK, but actually across Europe. My academic discipline is actually religious studies. So prior to taking on this role as director of the centre, I was head of religious studies at the university.
Fabulous, thank you. So we're going to be talking a little bit about career journeys today, and Opinderjit has very kindly offered to share hers with us. So could you tell me a little bit about your journey from PhD to where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. So just kind of almost towards the end of submitting my PhD, I actually had my eldest child. And so that brought with it its own kind of challenges, you know, in the sense that, you know, going to the Viva, etc. And then kind of after finishing the PhD, obviously my eldest daughter at that time, she was 3 months old. So, you know, I took some time out, you know, being a new mom, looking after her. My husband was working full time. And then after about, I had my second child not too long after that as well. So yeah, so immediately after the PhD, it was more so helping my husband with his business, but alongside that also editing my PhD into a book, you know, writing a journal article here or there, but that was pretty difficult when the kids were so little, and I was also kind of working full-time in my husband's business as well. And then kind of when my youngest one was about 4 months old, I felt that, you know, actually I want to do something productive with you know, having done the PhD, and religious studies as a discipline, it's quite small, you know, so jobs don't come up every few months, etc. You know, they quite rarely come up. So I decided to go and do a PGCE in secondary religious education. And so yeah, I did that. And then just before I finished the actual course, I got an offer of a full-time job in West London at the Heathland School in Hounslow, which is a huge school. So that was where my first teaching position was. So we had planned as a family that we would actually move to London. So while my husband was sorting out things here with his business, myself and my eldest daughter went. I couldn't take my youngest daughter with me because she was in full-time, she needed full-time wraparound care, so she stayed with the grandparents during the week, and then we'd all kind of get together at the weekends. That was really difficult, but you know, you have to do what you have to do. And then things kind of didn't go as planned, and so we had to actually come back to the Midlands, you know, because of various things, such as, you know, the business didn't sell in time, etc., etc. But luckily enough, you know, touch wood, whenever one door closes, another one opens. So as soon as I handed in my notice, because during your first year of teaching, it's known as a QTS, so you have to have a whole year of teaching practice before you can qualify, you know, as a teacher. Yeah. And so luckily, as soon as I left London, another opportunity opened in Leicester. And again, that was in religious education teaching, and that was maternity leave. So that was only for 3 months. And luckily, just before that came to an end, a full-time position opened up in Nottingham, which is where we used to live. So that was great. So, you know, I actually completed my first year of, you know, a kind of QTS in 3 different schools, you know, from London to Leicester to Nottingham. And then just as I was finishing that first year of QTS, I was offered head of religious studies in another secondary school in Nottingham, which of course I took on. And then I always wanted to go back into research, you know, but being a full-time teacher, you don't really get that kind of time to be able to do that. I was doing some research on the side, and then just, you know, like out of nowhere, this job at Wolverhampton came up, and they were actually looking for expertise in Indian religions. You know, and that was absolutely a dream come true, because, you know, my master's was actually in Indian religions. You know, and by the Indian religions, you know, we talk about Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism and Sikhism. So those religions that actually developed on Indian soil. And so it was great. I came for the job, and by that time my PhD had already been published into a book, and that really helped. I'd actually had that published when I started the job in London, so it made it, and then there was a few articles that I wrote here or there. So, you know, when you go for a job at university, you know, your publishing record it's very important. So yeah, so from that I got a job as a lecturer in religious studies, but specifically in the Indian religions and also in the philosophy of religion. A few years later got the post of senior lecturer, and then a few months after that I got promoted to head of religious studies at the university, which was great, which was absolutely fantastic. And then the centre came, you know, the seeds of it were kind of, you know, just sown out of nowhere. Because of the big Sikh community and the big Punjabi community that we have in Wolverhampton, the university felt it was a good strategic move to actually establish a centre here. And given my expertise is in Sikh studies, you know, it made sense to kind of, you know, try and be a part of that wider community that we have around us at the university. And yeah, and then hence, obviously I had to give up my position as head of religious studies, taking over the role of leading the centre. So yeah, I still do some teaching at undergraduate religious studies at the moment. We did have an MA in Sikh studies, but, you know, alongside a number of other courses at the university, that's on pause at the moment because of the pandemic. So hope to be able to start that up again. And then yeah, I've got 6 PhD students. You know, all related in one way or another to Sikh studies. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's kind of my journey from PhD to now.
And you're also an associate professor, so I know that's in knowledge exchange. Could you tell us a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So the work that I do, for me, it's very important that it actually makes an impact on the community that I study. And so specifically, I study the Sikh community and the wider Punjabi community. So in terms of knowledge exchange, the community engagement, you know, kind of, you know, how you share that knowledge through your research is very important. So the Centre for Sikh and Punjabi Studies actually gives myself and my colleagues that platform from which to do that. So, you know, the outreach that we have, the work that we do with the community, it's embedded in robust research, but not research that's simply, you know, a report that lies on a shelf for the rest of its life and a couple of people read it. For me, I want my research to be read, to be used, and for there to be feedback actually, you know, from the Sikh and the Punjabi community. So in terms of that, we've organised a number of community facing events through the centre. A number of those have been celebrations of key events in the Sikh calendar. So in 2019 we celebrated, when I say we, I'm a Sikh myself, so in 2019 we celebrated 550 years since the birth of our faith. So actually the Sikh faith is actually the youngest of all the major world religions. We're only literally 552 years old. So, you know, you can imagine that there is still so much academic work to be done. You know, we're still, in some respects, very often we feel that we're going through many of those teething problems that the world faiths that, you know, are over thousands of years old have experienced and already come through to the other side. So what, for me, what's really exciting is that, you know, as I said, there are still so many gaps in the sense of, you know, what we discover about the Sikhs, you know, be that language, textual, philosophical, etc., etc. You know, when we talk about the study of any faith, it doesn't sit alone. there's so many different perspectives that there's so many different disciplines, that actually feed into that. So, you know, sociology, philosophy, politics, history, health related issues, etc. They all kind of come into that. So in terms of knowledge exchange, you know, we've been doing a number of projects around organ donation, say, for example, a project around, you know, a healthy lifestyle, which was commissioned by Birmingham City Council. So all of this is knowledge exchange in the sense that you do this work, and in many senses you could say it's action research, in the sense that, you know, you're doing this research to bring about a change in attitudes and behaviours in society. So in a nutshell, the whole knowledge exchange route, you know, which was for the first time the university returned what was known as the knowledge exchange framework, and the centre, the work of the centre was featured in that a number of times. And the university as a whole, we actually scored the top 10% of all universities that submitted to what's known as the KEF, the knowledge exchange framework. So that's absolutely brilliant. You know, and it's such a positive way of actually, you know, making the community feel part of the university, but also the university to feel a part of the community as well. You know, and because of this, the response, the support from the community, not just in Wolverhampton, you know, nationally and actually internationally as well, has been absolutely phenomenal. So the centre has an advisory board, you know, and on there, you know, we have kind of, you know, movers and shakers of the SICK community, you know, on a national level, you know, who kind of, you know, you share ideas, etc. They have their own ideas, and it's all about, you know, making sure that what we do is pitched, you know, at a level of which the community would be welcome. But, you know, being a kind of, you know, an insider myself, you know, I've been brought up with, you know, etiquette, what's acceptable, what's not. So that helps a great deal, you know, and, you know, that whole, if any of the students are kind of, you know, working on that whole insider, outsider kind of, you know, perspective in their research, you know, the whole reflexivity very much comes into my work on a daily basis. And, you know, as an insider, how do you kind of, you know, bracket out your own your assumptions, your understanding, you know, etc., so that the research that you do, it's entirely based on the primary data that you gather. And yeah, I mean, and it's been such a wonderful journey, you know, since the centre has started. It's the support that we've had from the community. It's just been absolutely fantastic. And what also has helped is being fluent in a number of Asian languages. Mm-hmm. You know, we have to remember that, you know, that the older generation can't necessarily, you know, understand English. So, you know, being fluent in Punjabi, but also being able to hold a conversation in Hindi and Urdu as well, it's really helped, because the Punjabi community, it's not just the Sikh community. You know, the Punjabi community is huge, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but Punjabi is actually the second most spoken language in Wolverhampton. You know, which again, you know, working around the census 2021, you know, promoting the whole, you know, let's keep the Punjabi language alive, let's transmit it to the next generation, is also part of the fact that the university has funded a huge project around digital humanities. Which started this year actually, and the Punjabi project is the flagship project of that overall project. So yeah, you know, as I said, it's been a really exciting time. You know, COVID, the pandemic, the lockdown has paused a few of the things, you know, in sense of community engagement. You know, there's only so many, you know, kind of, you know, online seminars and workshops that, you know, you can put on. So I am really looking forward to going back into the community, especially with our organ donation project. You know, we've had some fantastic artwork commissioned for it. And we just need to go out into the gurdwaras, which are the Sikh places of worship, and the mandirs, etc., to be able to share the work that we've done through them.
And the work that you do in the centre also helps people like me who are outside your religion better understand it. I know that you've been working with the media, with media portrayals and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are still so many stereotypes around who the Sikhs are, you know, and not all Sikhs wear turbans. not all Sikhs have uncut hair. But despite saying that, there is still so much religious illiteracy around who the Sikhs are, and a lot of the work I do, it is to promote, you know, a better understanding of who the Sikhs are. So, you know, the BBC drama EastEnders, say for example, I'm consultant on that for their Sikh family. If anybody watches EastEnders, for their Panesar family, you know, just to make sure that there's nothing in, you know, in the kind of the more faith-related scenes that may cause offence to anybody. And there's been another recent documentary that was aired last April. It was called Being Sikh. Well, the correct pronunciation is Sikh. Yeah. You know, because, you know, it comes from the word Sikhna, which means to learn. So essentially, a Sikh is one who is constantly learning. So that whole kind of, you know, guru student relationship is something that's very important in the Sikh faith. And so, yeah, so, you know, I've been consultant to a number of kind of documentaries on the BBC, but also wider as well. You know, there's a lot of media inquiries that come through. A couple of years ago also, there was an incident of a Sikh boy, schoolboy, who was bullied in Telford, and as a result of that, the centre was commissioned to undertake an audit of how primary and secondary schools in Telford and Wrekin Council teach about the Sikhs. So that was interesting to be able to go and talk to primary and secondary school students, kind of, you know, maybe address some of their stereotypes, but also to celebrate the good practice as well in those schools as well. And I also work with a number of examination boards as well. So a few years ago, the OCR board, you know, wanted to include a study of the Sikhs, you know, within the GCSE philosophy and ethics route. So I wrote the specs for that. Wrote the textbooks and the teacher's guide. So it's all about kind of, you know, bringing out a more of an awareness of that, you know, the fact that there is diversity, just like there is in any other faith community. There's diversity amongst the Sikhs as well. You know, not all that Sikhs believe, practice and behave in exactly the same way. And so there's a big emphasis in what I do on lived experience, you know, on the lived faith or the lived Sikhi. You know, I don't like the term Sikhism because it's just got so many connotations around it. So the correct term is Sikhi, with the Sikh way of life or the Sikh faith. So, you know, again, this is something that I'm currently working on. So recently, as from January the 1st, I was made president of the national body for theology and religious organisations and departments in universities. This also extends to schools and colleges as well. And so for me, that's a huge opportunity to actually, you know, not just about the Sikh faith, but all faiths. You know, if we're talking about peaceful coexistence, if we're talking about communities that thrive together, you know, we really need to understand why certain people dress in a certain way, why they may not eat certain foods. So that whole emphasis around religious literacy, you know, is very important if we want to have, you know, societies that coexist. And, you know, again, you know, that whole word, you know, tolerance or tolerance is something that I absolutely detest when it comes to understanding others. You know, you tolerate somebody because you have to. So when we're talking about religious literacy, it's not about tolerance, it's about shared respect. It's about, you know, understanding, you know, where others come from.
My cat has just decided he'd like to come and have a listen. Thank you for that. I mean, you're doing so much work in the area, and it's lovely to see how some of those early career experiences have given you skills and knowledge that you've brought into your work within the university as well. My next question is there anything that you wished you'd known right at the beginning of that career journey that you know now?
Yeah, you know, kind of I did my PhD 20 years ago. So, you know, in the span of 20 years, there are lots of kind of lessons that you learn, in the sense that, you know, what would I do differently? You know, were I able to go back in time? And I would really say focus, you know, trying to keep focused on one thing at a time. is important. You know, for so many years I had, you know, my fingers in so many different pies, and actually when I started the university, I was 8 months pregnant with my third child, and so kind of he's lived that journey with me. But having 3 very young children at that time, you know, taking on a new job such as this one at university, you want to try and please everybody, you know, when you take on tasks that, you know, you then spend, you know, all night doing. And it's what I would really say is, you know, really think about the work-life balance. And I've been, and you know, recently, you know, the last few years, I've been a bit more conscious of the fact that, you know, you have to try and say no to certain things. And I know that's hard to do when you're just starting out in a career. You know, you want to enhance your profile, you want to, you know, you want people to know about what you're doing, because that's the way that opportunities tend to come your way as well. So one lesson I've learned is work smarter, not necessarily work harder, you know, and you know, try and stay focused. And sometimes that is difficult to do. You know, I do appreciate that, especially, you know, when you're working, maybe when you've got, you know, a young family. But, you know, just really think about, you know, what's realistic in a 9-to-5 kind of, you know, work. I know we don't all work 9-to-5, but be realistically about what you can do in the space of a day. You know, and really try and get hold of a good mentor early on. You know, I had an excellent mentor, which, you know, especially, you know, when I got to a few years after I was at the university, and your mentor helps you see the bigger picture. You know, sometimes, as I said, you know, sometimes you're so engrossed in, you know, there's this to do, there's that to do, that you can't necessarily step outside of that and look inwards. But having a good mentor who is, you know, who is where you wanted to be or where you want to be, it's really important.
Thank you. So you've started to very nicely lead me into my final question, which is if you've got any tips that you would give to postgraduate researchers and early career researchers on their postdoctoral journey.
Yeah, so I would say kind of enhancing your profile is very important, you know, and this is something that I tell my students, you know, if the more that you can put out in, you know, I mean, we can't, you know, all write journal articles, you know, constantly, but, you know, a few blogs here or there, you know, social media is a great way of people getting to know about your research. And, you know, after, you know, you've any student has completed their PhD, you'll then, you know, you need to think about the next steps. And the more people that know about what you're doing, you know, the more offers you may get about writing papers together. You know, there may be somebody that's submitting a bid somewhere, and they may think, oh yes, there is somebody at the University of Wolverhampton who's actually researching this, and then you may get involved in a bid. And, you know, and this is all about kind of strengthening your postdoctoral profile, your CV. You know, going for jobs, etc., especially at higher education, they are very competitive. But if you can show that you've got that interaction with the wider world as well, that's great. So, you know, whenever any media opportunities come along, you know, I always encourage my students to take part in that. So BBC Sounds did this whole series around, it was called Seek Reflections. You know, so a number of my students kind of, you know, gave their reflections in that. You know, I've been pushing them to present their research, no matter what stage it is at. You know, whether it's very, you know, whether they're starting off or whether they're more developed, to you know, share their research at conferences. You know, and the beauty of that is, as a PhD student, nobody's expecting you to have all the answers, but some of the feedback that you can get from conference attendees, you know, really helps you kind of think about, oh yes, I hadn't actually thought about that. So my advice would be is to, you know, don't sit in silo, you know, let people know about what you're doing, you know, even if it's a blog, even if it's just something on Twitter, etc. You'll be surprised as to how other people, you know, may be able to kind of, you know, give you ideas, give you tips on, you know, have you had, and, you know, if you're doing, you know, a PhD that requires you to gather primary data through interviews, etc., that is the way to, you know, really kind of gain the trust of you know, of your sample or the communities that you're going to be working with.
Okay, thank you for that wonderful advice. There's loads of really useful information there, so thank you very much for sharing your reflections with us.
Thank you, Deborah, for inviting me. Thank you.
You're more than welcome. And I've got to say, actually, when I wanted to know a little bit more about Sikhism, it was your book that I went to and I read.
Oh, right. Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you everybody for joining us and for listening. If you've got any ideas about the topics that you would like us to cover in these blogs, please do put the ideas into the comments below. And while you're there, if you could subscribe and click the bell, you'll get to know when we upload further videos. We upload every week on a Friday, and I look forward to speaking to you all again soon. Bye.